There's then a video package with Vince saying he's going to inject WWE with a lethal dose of poison. The NWO costing Austin the title, I think, at No Way Out. Austin kidnapping Scott Hall. Hall asking Austin to prove he's the toughest SOB in the WWE. It's all building up to Steve Austin's match with Scott Hall. Any thoughts on the package? Any thoughts on the build?
Didn't Austin pour alcohol over Scott Hall when Scott Hall was on some tablets that alcohol made him vomit or something, which is unsavory? I think that is a thing, yeah.
Well, it's funny because when Austin comes out to the ring, his jacket says alcohol fueled. Now, given the problems he himself was having with alcohol at this point and would have for the rest of the year, that would result in probably Austin's most unsavory time in his life, effectively, and the very real alcohol issues that have been well documented by this point with Scott Hall. I thought alcohol fueled was quite an apt tagline for this match in general, really. And on that, Austin comes to the ring first, which I again thought, what's going on here? Like, it's Austin. He can't be coming out first here. This is just mad.
This was all mad, unfortunately. Mad and bad.
Yes, it's Scott Hall versus Steve Austin. It's a 10-minute match. Austin for 10 minutes. Austin for 10 minutes. This is the guy that in 2001 was unquestionably the best wrestler in North America without a shadow of a doubt. 10-minute match at WrestleMania. Effectively, Austin stuns Scott Hall twice and then pins him, celebrates with a beer after the contest. Stephen.
What a waste of Steve Austin. He had one more WrestleMania match after this and you put him in with Scott Hall. Yeah, I just thought this was such a waste of him. And actually, so was a lot of 2001. I just think there's ways to do, if you have the guts to do the WCW angle and you really build up DDP and you really build up Booker T as legitimate threats to the WWF guys, then it doesn't really matter that you haven't got Hogan or Goldberg because you present them as equal. And that's the way to do it. But no one's really got, apart from maybe, I suppose you could say that the early portion of the NWO angle, no one's really got an invasion angle right in North America. And I thought ever since that invasion pay-per-view did the biggest non-WrestleMania buy rate in company history, and that was largely off the back of Steve Austin turning babyface in the week before it happened because people really wanted that. I was a big Steve Austin fan and I really wanted that. But yeah, this going through the match, why the second referee didn't DQ Hall for when Nash attacked the first one, I don't know. They did their best. The crowd sort of got into it at the end, but again, I just don't think there's many people on the planet that wanted this attraction at WrestleMania. Scott Hall's stunner bump does still look great 21 years on, though.
I mean, you hit a lot of the stuff on the head there, Stephen. I mean, I've said it multiple times, and this is a bit of a theory in this show. What a difference a year makes. For Stone Cold Steve Austin to go from that main event versus The Rock last year to this spot on the show. Wow. I don't know this for sure. I can only assume that they were possibly looking at doing Austin versus each member of the NWO separately, because he did say during the intro package, one member of, we talked about Scott Hall, one member of the NWO going down. So I'm assuming perhaps they were maybe going to do sort of one by one. That's what they were thinking of. I don't know. The whole presentation of what's meant to be one of their biggest guys. Yeah, for him coming out first. No, like the video package, I don't think did him any favors, because just talking about how he used to be awesome and seeing all like his previous highlights and then seeing where he is at that moment was, again, it just came across as really sad. The match itself I felt that Steve was on the back foot and selling for way too much of it. And yeah, there wasn't a lot. It felt like maybe a TV match, TV main event, maybe. The bumps that Scott Hall took were for the Stone Cold Stunners were the highlight, absolutely. And that's it. What a tragic waste of Stone Cold Steve Austin on your biggest show of the year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Steve Austin, as you said, one more. I have to pull you up on that, Stephen, because he did have two more, because obviously he had one at WrestleMania 38 as well.
Do we count that?
Well, I think we have to, don't we?
I was there. Damn right.
But yes, effectively, for his main run, this was his last but one WrestleMania, and it's against Scott Hall. Matt, I don't believe for a second they were going to have him go through the whole NWO, because I believe that Austin rejected a match with Hogan at this show. So I believe the original plan was Austin Hogan, and Austin said, no, I'm not facing him. I think Austin, in general, of all the people in the company, was the most put out by the NWO signings. I think he absolutely wanted nothing to do with them coming in. I think he felt very, very put out by that. And I think probably was also considering the fact that it's interesting, Stephen, when you say about they wasted Austin during 2001, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think they made a bad mistake in turning him heel, but I don't think they wasted him. I think what he did in 2001 was excellent.
Yeah, all the way
through.
But I think it could have been even higher, I think.
Maybe, but I don't think they wasted him. I think they wasted in the long run. They wasted his star power. Like that was where they ruined it both times. Both times he turned heel, they ruined the star power. They ruined this idea that this was, you know, a super absolutely mega star. But I don't think they wasted him in terms of what they had him do. I think what he did was actually really valuable, really great. Like if you go back and watch Raw that year, he's pretty much carrying the show nearly all year round. Like he's just phenomenal all the way through the year, both in the ring and outside the ring. He's just magnificent. So I don't think they waste him, but I think where they wasted what they'd done, again, I go back to that thing of you've done it now, keep him heel. Just keep him heel. You can't go back to what you had before. You've made him a heel. It's, you know, maybe you can do it in 4 or 5 years, but you can't do it now. The fans have been too let down by him. You've got to just roll with him being a heel and don't bring in the NWO. Do those 2 things and we're fine. I think Austin probably carries on.
Yeah, I remember very anecdotal stuff in terms of just my sort of wider friendship group. So I think I mentioned on the WrestleMania 16 podcast that was the biggest turnout I would ever had at my parents for WrestleMania, and that was like the biggest sort of deal. Now, a bit like you, Ben, most of my friends went off to university in autumn 2000. So the few of the guys that were around with me that didn't go. By this summer, a few friends would come over and watch sort of SmackDown, but they're like, I don't what all these WCW guys doing, and also I really don't like seeing Steve Austin as a heel. So, and I think Jim Ross has talked about it. Sort of John Wayne should never be the bad guy, and I think those Steve Austin stuff was highly entertaining. I can forgive WrestleMania 17. I can forgive that absolutely. They Steve Austin wanted to do it. He wanted to do it the year earlier. They pull the trigger, but that invasion one is absolutely unforgivable. You had to have Steve Austin as the head of the WWF, turn Jericho and make him the top star in WCW, turn Angle and make him the top star in WCW, or turn someone other than Steve Austin, and you've got enough there, even without the Hogans and all that sort of stuff. And then you could bring those two. In terms of the longer term planning out of this show, any planning that Vince McMahon was making with Kevin Nash, whose body was completely broken down, or Scott Hall with all the problems he had, or Hulk Hogan, who, okay, he might want to do business for a couple of months, but Hogan's gone by the summer, and then he wouldn't be around again until WrestleMania the following year, and then he's gone really soon after that. So any long-term planning with these guys is insanity. So you've got to protect what you've got, and I think that Steve Austin really wasn't, perhaps wasted is the wrong way of putting it. I think protected that star power from whatever it was, July 2001 to this point. I'm not sure you've done much to protect him, really.
Oh, it's interesting. I still strongly believe that the damage was done at WrestleMania 17. I think even if they just kept him babyface after the invasion, he would have been less of a star. You turned him heel. You've had him do it now. You can't. It is the toothpaste back into the tube analogy. You can't undo this.
I think those reactions and the buy rate made me think that there was something there still.
Maybe, and maybe you're right. Obviously, the buy rate from WrestleMania 17, which was over 1 million for the first time, this was down by about 200,000 compared to that. So WrestleMania 18 had lopped off, and they lose even more before leading into WrestleMania 19. Yeah. I just think that once you did it at WrestleMania 17, that was the end of Austin being a megastar, unless he's a really great heel. And unfortunately, he wasn't. They didn't do enough in those early months to make him a significantly great heel. Plus, the other weird thing about it is that there's a whole bunch of confusing stuff about Triple H should have been a babyface by the time WrestleMania 17 came along. There's also the thing that The Rock's leaving to go away and do a film. So you're like, it's just not the ideal time for Austin to be a heel, because you kind of need, there's no babyface. So, Triple H needed to have turned in order for this to work, but he didn't do it, and it's really strange.
The next night I'm Raw in Fort Worth, so I was at that again. Triple H, when his music hit, and it was Steve Austin was in the Rock in the cage, and I can't remember how it finished, but obviously it was like some schmoz. When his music hit, the crowd absolutely erupted, and that's the moment. If you're turning Steve Austin heel, you have to turn Triple H babyface there. And then they got together, and it was another groaner. It was a groan. The air was out of that Fort Worth crowd that had been electric all night long, and it's like, you haven't done it for what reason? I never really understand whether they were going to come back to that, and the 2-man power trip were together, and Triple H was eventually going to turn. But that was the moment, I thought, that if you're going to pull the trigger. And again, Triple H never really got back to that point in time as a babyface. He never got back to, I didn't think, in that 2002 run.
Well, I mean, I'd go further than that. I think Triple H should already have been a babyface by WrestleMania 17. He should have turned babyface during his feud with Angle. Ultimately, that should have been where he turned babyface in the autumn of 2000. And then you book from there, basically, because that's where Triple H should have been. He was reluctant because The Rock and Austin were both babyfaces, and he didn't want to lose the top billing. But
he went back on Austin, didn't he? That was the he was sort of tweener, and he went back on Austin, didn't he? I think was the thing. Yeah.
He knew he wasn't. If he was going to be a babyface, he knew he wasn't going to be as popular as Austin or The Rock, which is why he always wanted to go heel, because he knew he'd be one of if not the best heels.
But the crazy thing was, if at that time he had turned babyface, he would have been the top babyface because The Rock was going and Austin was turning heel. Yeah. So at that point, it would have made absolute sense. But for whatever reason, they just didn't do it. And ultimately, I think that's what led us to this point where Steve Austin now has gone back to being a babyface. It's just not the same. He's still a main event guy. He's still one of the biggest stars in the company, but the edge has been taken off it massively. He's just not as popular or as big a draw as he was prior to the heel turn. And they're shoving him in this match. He's obviously pissed off with the fact the NWO are even there. As I said, he's rejected the match with Hogan, didn't want it, worried that what happens to The Rock in the match that's to come, we'll talk about in a second, was going to happen to him. And we'll talk about how The Rock deals with it, because I think that's really interesting. And he ultimately would be gone effectively 2-3 months after this. And then he'd go through the unsavory part of his life where he's obviously drinking a lot and is arrested for domestic abuse of Deborah, which is awful and something that Austin gets a bit of a pass for, I think, amongst wrestling fans. Maybe because it was such a long time ago and it feels like it was a moment in his life rather than this is a defining character feature of who Austin is. But I don't think we should let him off for it. I think we've got to call him out for, and who probably WWE were too eager to welcome him back. And given what he'd done, they probably shouldn't have been quite so eager to do so.
I think the Austin example, and I could go on a long rant about cancel culture, which I'm not going to do. But the Austin thing to me is a classic. I love Steve Austin. Let's and do I think necessarily that someone should be judged on probably the absolute worst moment of someone's life? Now, in some instances, yeah, absolutely they should. You absolutely should be judged on that, and there's no coming back. This one for Steve Austin, I think if everything in Steve Austin's life had been 10 years later, he was born 10 years later and his stardom was 10 years later, Steve Austin's not coming back from this. But I think it is an example that if you're at a certain level of stardom, you can pretty much get away with anything, and there's loads of big historic figures over time in all sorts of industries, music, acting, film directors, wrestlers, who have done really, really bad stuff, and they are, forgiven.
So maybe to counter a little bit about what you said there is that, and you're right, Austin's got off it because he's got a big name and so have others. But you talked about, should we judge people on their worst moment? And probably not, but at the same time, let's not forget, this is probably the worst moment of Deborah's life as well. And 100%. She's the victim.
Yeah, 100%.
And so judging him on that is perhaps unfair. But for WWE to very, very quickly turn around and say, oh, well, forget it, it's all forgotten. You may have beaten up your wife, who also, by the way, happens to have been quite loyal worker for us as well during that same period. We're just going to forgive that straight away and you're going to come back. Like, that isn't very forgivable in my view.
No, we're on the same page with that, 100%. Yeah.
Matt, what did you think of the match?
Thank God you didn't ask me about any of that, because I was going to say I don't think I could have added a single bit. I think you covered it both brilliantly. So nice one. Just double check. We are still on Steve Austin Scott Hall match.
we are still on.
I was wondering. Yeah, we are. Yeah.
There wasn't anything to it. It felt like, again, like a TV match or maybe a TV main event. It was quite dull. Like you said, I felt that Steve sold far more than he should have done. You mentioned earlier, Stephen, how the hell that Scott Hall didn't get disqualified for Kevin Nash blatantly beating the shit out of referees. Who the hell knows? If this was the position that they were going to put Stone Cold Steve Austin in, I can't believe I'm actually making this as a suggestion, but if that's the way they were going to go, they may as well have been in a handicap match and done Stone Cold versus Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Would it have been any better? Probably not. But if that's kind of the route they were going with Kevin Nash at ringside, it was a nothing match anyway. Why don't you get them both on there and just make it a handicap match? But what a terrible use of Stone Cold Steve Austin.
It's not a very good match. It's all right. It's average. It's fine, but it's not Austin quality. It's not what WrestleMania should be for Austin. And this really is the bit where, for me, it really typifies why I really had a problem with WWE at this point. And this is probably a little bit misguided in itself, but I always felt like Austin, Rock, Foley, Triple H and Undertaker to a lesser extent, they won the Monday Night War. And suddenly, and we'll get onto this when we do the Rock Hogan match, but suddenly Rock's persona non grata, fans are booing him. Austin's being pushed to the side. Mick Foley's retired, obviously, and you've got Hogan, and you've got Flair, and you've got Kevin Nash, and you've got Scott Hall, and they're coming into prominent positions in the company, and you're like, these guys already WWE, now they're coming in WWE, and I just don't want them, and I really didn't like it. This really turned me off, this period massively turned me off of wrestling in general, because at the time WCW didn't exist, ECW didn't exist, TNA didn't yet exist, nor did Ring of Honor. We're talking about the only major North American wrestling promotion when I say North America, I tend to exclude Mexico from that, because in wrestling terms they are different regions of the world. But even Mexico, the peso had crashed, and the business wasn't as good over there. In Japan, there had been problems, in terms of the different talent exoduses from various different companies at the time, which had played havoc with an industry that was already on the turn anyway, had gone down from the mid-90s. So basically, WWE was wrestling for this period of time. It really was as close as it's ever been to wrestling, and it was then this, and I just didn't get on with it at all. And I always felt during 99, 2000, 2001, especially during that 2000 and 2001, because Austin was injured for most of 2000, because Triple H was injured for most of 2001, Austin and The Rock, or Rock and Triple H, were actually quite generous with the way they worked with most of the rest of the roster. I can remember Triple H having matches with Taka Michinoku and the Brooklyn Brawler. He had a match with Taz on SmackDown, which was a really quite competitive match just after Taz won the ECW World title at that time when Mike Awesome moved to WCW. Now, don't get me wrong, they did it to show that the WWE was superior to ECW, but it still was a competitive match. It made Taz look as good as he had done his entire run in WWE. Triple H had a great match with Rikishi, which I mentioned on the WrestleMania 2000 show in early 2000 on SmackDown. The Rock was working with all kinds of different people to give them a little bit of a push. And then whenever the three of them were suddenly on screen, they all seemed to get much more selfish, and you saw a lot less kind of that kind of giving. And then that just went completely out the window the minute the NWO and Ric Flair came in, because they were like, now we've really got to protect our positions because these guys are coming in, and Vince, these people are like to turn Vince's head because he's a weird guy. He's just weird. And I think that they brought in the NWO because they were worried about this WrestleMania. They didn't think they had the steam to make it a major show, and they might have been right because of the fact they did what they did with Austin, and so, which is why I still go back to they should have kept Austin as a heel and had The Rock versus Austin, babyface versus heel, for both titles in the main event. I don't see what the problem with that is.
I'm just going to say though, like I know it was a drop in terms of pay-per-view buys from the last year, right? But 860,000 is not bad.
Oh no, it's not bad.
Really good, actually.
Especially in an era before UK buys. So this is just North America, isn't it, basically? Yeah.
And it is a significant drop-off, though, from the previous year, like 200,000. Yeah. And maybe they were right. Maybe they needed the NWO to come in to maintain that high level. But long-term, I think you see the buy rate for the following year. Of course. And I think that's why that buy rate is so bad, because they've not thought long-term about this one. And it's a very short-termist, let's get all these guys in and have these matches.